The wedding dress loomed in the shadowed corner of the chapel like a specter from a bad dream, its lace whispering taunts at young Boon Carter. At 22, he'd imagined his future filled with open plains and wild mustangs, not shackled to a stranger to settle his fool father's debts. But Sterling Vaughn, the snake who owned every IOU in Redemption Valley, had made the terms crystal clear: marry the widow or lose the Carter ranch land his grandfather had carved from blood and dust. Boone's knuckles whitened around the windowsill as he watched tumbleweeds roll past the chapel steps, mocking his trapped existence. The snickers of townsfolk burned his ears. Ain't he a sight, trading his freedom for a cradle robber? But none of those vultures knew the truth. His father's whiskey-soaked gamble on a doomed cattle drive had left them drowning in red ink, and Vaughn's grip was tighter than a hangman's noose. The door groaned open, and Boone turned, expecting the weary preacher or some gawking busybody. Instead, the widow, Kora Maddox, strode down the aisle like a storm rolling across the mesa. She wasn't some frail crone hell. She moved with the quiet fury of a woman who'd outlived 2 husbands in a Comanche raid. Her emerald eyes pinned him where he stood, and her black dress, stitched with the precision of a woman who tolerated no nonsense, made his own frayed collar feel shameful. "You look like a man walking to his own firing squad," she said, her voice sandpaper rough from years of giving orders. Boone's retort died in his throat when she leaned in, her breath warm with cinnamon and secrets. "Listen close, boy. Vaughn thinks he's bought himself a puppet show, but I've got scars older than you. Play this right, and maybe we both get something out of it." Behind them, Vaughn smirked from the front pew, his gold pocket watch glinting like a predator's eye. But as Kora gripped Boone's arm to march him toward the altar, he felt it. The tremor in her fingers slight as a rattler's warning. The preacher's droning vows blurred into the stuffy air, but Boone caught the way Kora's jaw tightened when Vaughn chuckled at "Till death do us part." Then, just as the final amen hung in the air, the widow did the unthinkable. She spun Boone around and kissed him hard, a performance so convincing the congregation gasped. "That's for the gossip mongers," she muttered against his lips, then louder, "Sweet as arsenic, darling." Vaughn's applause was the only sound in the sudden silence, but Boone, for the first time that day, he almost smiled. The game was on. The preacher's final words hung in the air like gun smoke, and Boon Carter felt the weight of them settle into his bones. When Kora brushed her lips against his cheek, a gesture as stiff as a starched collar, he caught the scent of lavender and something deeper, like the memory of rain on parched earth. Sterling Vaughn materialized before the echoes of the ceremony faded his grin sharp enough to draw blood. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter," he drawled, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Married life suits you. Pity it had to start as a business transaction." He turned to Boone, eyes glinting like a rattler's scales. "Deed's yours at dawn, but cross me, boy, and I'll peel that ranch from your hands faster than a scalping knife takes hair." Boone's fists curled, but Kora stepped between them, her voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Save the threats, Vaughn. We're all square now." The moment Vaughn's boots clicked down the chapel steps, the air turned thick with unspoken tension. Dust motes danced in the slanting light, and the wind howled through the cracks like a restless spirit. "Your place or mine?" Kora asked, and Boone almost laughed until he saw the steel in her gaze. "Ain't got one," he admitted, kicking at the floorboards. "Miller lets me sleep in his hayloft when I mend his fences." Kora didn't flinch. "Then you're coming home with me. But listen close, this ain't some fairy tale." She yanked open the chapel door, revealing a wagon hitched to 2 draft horses with coats like burnished copper. Beneath the seat, a Winchester rifle lay within easy reach. As the wagon lurched forward, Kora laid down the law like a judge passing sentence. "Rule 1, I don't fetch your supper or darn your socks. Rule 2, my bedroom's off limits. Paper vows don't entitle you to a damn thing." The wheels hit a rut, jostling them shoulder to shoulder. Boone studied her the way her sun-weathered hands never faltered on the reins, the stubborn set of her jaw. "What's Rule 3? He asked. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of harness leather. Then, so quiet he barely caught it, "Don't ask about the man who came before you." But when her homestead came into view, A sturdy cabin guarded by a fence lined with thorny desert, rose Boone's breath hitched. The porch wasn't just repaired, it was reinforced with fresh timber, the kind a woman wouldn't bother with unless she expected trouble, and nailed beside the door, half hidden by wild ivy, hung a rusted sheriff's badge, its edges bent like it had been torn from someone's chest. Kora followed his stare and stiffened. "Some ghosts don't stay buried," she muttered, and for the first time, Boone wondered if he'd just shackled himself to a storm. The cabin looked like any other sun-bleached homestead, from the outside weathered pine and a rusted tin roof that sang when the wind hit just right. But when Kora shoved open the door, Boon Carter felt like he'd stepped into another world. Books, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, lining shelves that climbed every wall like ivy. Not the dog-eared dime novels peddled in saloons, but proper volumes bound in leather, their spines cracked from use. And in the corner, gleaming under the lamplight like a mirage, stood a piano so polished, Boone could see his own stunned reflection in its ebony finish. "Cat got your tongue?" Kora asked, shrugging off her duster. "Just didn't figure you for—" He gestured lamely at the room, suddenly aware of the trail dust caked on his boots. "For what, a woman who reads, or one who don't live in a pigsty?" Her laugh was sharp as a whip crack. "First husband had notions about civilization. Said knowledge was the only thing out here that couldn't be rustled or gambled away." She lit the oil lamps with quick, practiced flicks of her wrist, throwing shadows across a framed map of somewhere that sure as hell wasn't Texas. "Your room's upstairs. Don't track mud on my rug." The attic room was bare, as a monk's cell cot, washstand, a window overlooking the scrubland, but the sheets smelled like sage and lye soap. Boone sat heavily, the bed frame groaning under his weight. That morning he'd been a broke cowboy with nothing but his saddle and a head full of regrets. Now he was shackled to a widow who collected books like some Eastern blue blood, and music rose from below, slow and aching, the kind of tune that made a man remember things he'd rather forget. Boone found himself creeping down the stairs, drawn like a moth to the sight of Kora's calloused hands, moving over the keys with a tenderness that didn't match her iron voice. "You gonna lurk there all night?" she said without missing a note. "Or you want supper?" The table held cold venison sourdough bread and coffee, so rich it made his throat ache. "You play like someone who's seen a symphony," Boone ventured. "Had a teacher." Her knife sawed through the meat with surgical precision. "Back east." The blade stilled. "Back in a grave." For half a heartbeat her eyes flicked to the rifle leaning by the door. Then the horses came. Not the easy plod of a neighbor's mare, this was the thunder of riders pushing hard. Kora was at the window before Boone could blink, her fingers white-knuckled around the curtain. "Upstairs, now!" But the porch boards were already screaming under boot heels. The door burst open before either of them could move, and the man standing there with a Colt leveled at Kora's chest made Boone's blood turn to ice. "Well, ain't this cozy?" drawled Sterling Vaughn, his smile all teeth. "Y'all forgot to invite me to the wedding supper." The door shuddered under the force of a boot kick that sent splinters flying. "Kora Maddox, or should we say Catherine Walsh?" The voice dripped with venom, each syllable sharp as a bowie knife. Three men filled the doorway, their dust-choked coats reeking of hard miles and bad intentions, the leader's eyes flat and dead as a rattler's locked onto Kora. "5 years we've chased your ghost, darlin'. Time to settle accounts." Boone saw Kora's fingers tighten on the Winchester, but what chilled him more was the way she'd gone still, as quarry sensing a predator. "Run," she whispered without moving her lips. "Through the pantry, now." "Like hell." Boone stepped sideways, putting himself between her and the intruders. The lead gunslick's grin widened. "Well, ain't this sweet Catherine done got herself a guard dog?" His hand hovered near his Colt. "But pups got soft bellies." Kora's rifle came up smooth as sunrise. First man who draws dies where he stands. The room crackled with tension, thicker than prairie lightning. Boone's pulse hammered in his throat as the truth hit him, the piano, the books, that sheriff's badge by the door. None of it added up to a simple widow. "Your choice, Catherine." The leader's fingers twitched. "The papers you stole from Philadelphia National, or we burn this pretty house down with you in it." Boone barely registered the words before Kora's shot exploded like cannon fire. Plaster rained from the ceiling as she worked the lever action with terrifying precision. "Next one goes through your black heart, Silas." In that heartbeat of chaos, Boone saw the real Kora, not the reluctant bride, not the piano-playing enigma, but a woman who'd walked through fire and carried the embers in her soul. As the gunslick scrambled for cover, she grabbed Boone's arm with a grip that left bruises. "You still want to be my husband? Then help me kill these sons of bitches." Somewhere outside, a horse screamed. Somewhere inside, Boon Carter made his choice. He yanked the Remington from his belt and spun toward the shattered door, suddenly understanding why Sterling Vaughn had been so damn eager to marry him off. The widow Kora Maddox wasn't just hiding from debt collectors. She was a storm wearing a woman's skin. And Boone. He'd just stepped into the eye of it. Kora Maddox lowered her Winchester with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You boys want to hear about Philadelphia?" Her voice was smooth as aged bourbon, but Boone saw the dangerous glint in her gaze. "Let's have ourselves a civilized conversation." The lead gunman, Silas, she'd called him, froze like a rabbit sensing a trap. "What kind of trick is this, Catherine?" "No trick." Kora settled at the table like a queen holding court, her rifle resting against the chair within easy reach. "Boone, pour these gentlemen some coffee. They look parched." Boone's hands shook as he filled the tin cups, his mind racing. $50,000 federal crimes. The woman he'd married hours ago was peeling back layers he never knew existed. "Marcus Brennan sent you, didn't he?" Kora sipped her coffee, watching Silas over the rim. Still sore about losing his little banking empire, the gunman's jaw tightened. "We're here for what you stole." Kora's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Stole? That's rich." "Did your precious Mr. Brennan mention the money belonged to Dakota homesteaders, that he was laundering government funds to steal their land?" She leaned forward, the lamplight catching the fire in her eyes. "Or that my first husband died digging into his schemes?" A muscle twitched in Silas's cheek. His two partners shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between their leader and this calm, dangerous woman. "I didn't steal a dime," Kora continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried like a gunshot. "I recovered evidence, documents that could hang Marcus Brennan from the nearest cottonwood." She nodded toward the bookshelf. "Safe in Denver, just waiting for the right U.S. Marshal to come asking." Boone's coffee cup hit the table with a clatter. Suddenly, the piano, the books, the reinforced door, it all made terrible sense. His mail-order bride wasn't just some widow. She was a woman who'd been hunting bigger game than anyone in Redemption Valley could imagine. Silas's hand inched toward his Colt. "You expect us to believe—" "I expect you to think real hard," Kora cut in her fingers, brushing the Winchester's stock. "You ready to dance at the end of a rope for Marcus Brennan's sins?" The silence that followed was thicker than gun smoke. Outside, a coyote yipped in the distance, the sound carrying like a warning across the prairie. Boone held his breath, watching the realization dawn on the hired guns' faces. They hadn't been sent to collect stolen money. They'd been sent to silence a witness. Kora Maddox moved like a panther circling its prey, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "How much is Brennan paying you boys to die for him? 500, 1,000. She let the number hang in the air like a noose. Pennies compared to what he's stolen from starving homesteaders. The leader's hand twitched toward his revolver, but his two partners were already wavering. One of them, a raw-boned kid with a nervous tic, stepped forward. "Let me see that ledger." "Jake, don't be a fool," the leader snarled. Too late. The kid was already scanning Thomas Maddox's meticulous handwriting, his face draining of color as he traced the damning entries with a calloused finger. "Hell's bells. This has Governor Hartley's mark right here, and Judge Morrison's seal." Kora pressed her advantage like a general commanding troops. 43 pages of proof, enough to hang Marcus Brennan and half the territorial government with him. She turned the page with a flourish. "See that your boss didn't just steal from settlers. He stole from the U.S. Army. That's a federal rope he'll be dancing on." Boone's stomach churned. This wasn't just about money. It was about stolen futures, about widows and orphans cheated out of their homesteads while fat cats like Brennan grew richer. The kind of injustice that made decent men turn outlaw. The leader cocked his pistol with a sickening click. "Enough talk, hand over." Hoofbeats, dozens of them pounding closer like a coming storm. Through the shattered window, Boone saw torchlight flickering against the cottonwoods. Too many riders for a posse moving with the precision of men who owned the night. Kora's knuckles whitened around the ledger. "Oh, God." The leader's smirk returned. "Seems Mr. Brennan decided to collect his property personally." The front door exploded inward before the last word left his mouth. Marcus Brennan didn't enter like a thief. He strode in like a king, his custom-made boots crushing the splintered wood beneath them. Boone expected some mustache-twirling villain, but the man who filled the doorway was worse. Dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than Boone's ranch, Brennan looked like a banker fresh from Sunday service. Only his eyes gave him away cold as a snake's, calculating as he took in the scene. When they landed on Kora, his lips curved into a smile that never touched those dead eyes. "Well, Catherine Walsh Maddox, or should I say, Mrs. Carter now." His chuckle was oil on water. "I do love a woman who keeps things interesting." Boone's hand crept toward his Colt. Every instinct screamed that the real battle had just begun. Marcus Brennan stepped through the ruined doorway like he owned the world, and in that moment Boone realized he probably did. The man looked more like a prosperous banker than a criminal mastermind, his tailored suit and polished shoes out of place in the rough-hewn cabin. But his eyes, flat and cold as a winter creek, told the real story. "Well, Catherine," Brennan said, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. 5 years on the run, and here you are playing housewife in some backwater town." His gaze flicked to Boone. "Though I see you've upgraded from a dead lawman to a live cowboy. Charming." Kora's grip on the journal tightened. Judge Morrison didn't die of natural causes. Brennan's smile never reached his eyes. Tragic, wasn't it? A man so young felled by a sudden indisposition. He adjusted his cufflinks with practiced ease. Governor Hartley, however, has proven most accommodating once we reached an understanding. The air in the room turned thick as molasses in January. Boone's fingers itched for his Colt, but the dozen armed men crowding the doorway made that suicide. Brennan snapped his fingers. "Turn this place inside out. I want every scrap of—" The hiss of a striking match cut through his command. Kora held the flickering flame inches from the journal's pages. "One more step," she said calmly, "and your empire goes up in smoke." For the first time, Brennan's polished facade cracked. "You're bluffing. That book is your only leverage." The match burned closer to Kora's fingers, the acrid smell of sulfur mixing with wood smoke. Sweat beaded on Brennan's forehead despite the cool evening air. Then Kora dropped her bombshell with a smile that would have made a rattler proud. "Did I mention Thomas made 3 copies, one's in Denver, another's with a Pinkerton agent who owes me a favor?" She let the match burn down to her fingertips before snuffing it out. "The third, well, let's just say you'll never find it. Just say." Boone watched realization dawn on Brennan's face. This wasn't just about recovering stolen money anymore. His whole carefully constructed world of bribes and lies was balanced on the edge of a knife. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, the sound rising like a warning through the pines. Somewhere in the darkness, a new game was beginning. And for the first time since that morning's shotgun wedding, Boon Carter felt something like hope stir in his chest. The match hissed as it hit the floorboards, its dying glow illuminating the raw fear in Marcus Brennan's eyes. 3 copies, Kora repeated, her voice steady as a gunslinger's aim. 1 in Denver, 1 with a federal investigator in Washington, and the third. She smiled coldly. "Let's just say Marshal Bradley has interesting reading material for his ride tonight." Outside, the rhythmic cadence of approaching horses grew louder. 6 riders moving with the deliberate precision of lawmen. Brennan's hired guns melted into the shadows. Like the cowards, they were leaving their employer, standing alone in the lamplight, his perfect suit suddenly looking as wrinkled as his plans. "You lying bitch!" Brennan snarled, his polished facade crumbling as he drew a pearl-handled revolver. "If I hang, you're dancing right beside me." Boone moved faster than he'd ever moved in his life. The gunshot cracked like thunder as he threw himself in front of Kora, the bullet tearing through his shoulder with white-hot pain. He barely registered her arms, catching him as his knees buckled, only the fierce protectiveness in her touch as she lowered him to the ground. Through the haze of pain, Boone saw Brennan raise the gun again, this time to his own temple. But Marshal Bradley's Colt spoke first, the shot knocking the weapon from Brennan's hand. "Marcus Brennan," the lawman's voice boomed, "you're under arrest for theft of federal funds and enough other crimes to keep you in irons till the century turns." 3 months later, sunlight poured through the cabin windows where gunsmoke once hung heavy. Kora's fingers danced across the piano keys, playing a lively tune that made the rafters hum. Boone leaned against the doorframe, his shoulders still tender, but healing, watching the woman who'd turned his life upside down. "Any regrets?" she asked without missing a note. Boone thought of the headlines: Brennan sentenced to 20 years, the stolen $50,000 building schools across the territory, even Sterling Vaughn suddenly developing a conscience about those Carter family debts. He crossed the room in 3 strides, turning his wife to face him. "Just one," he murmured, tracing the scar on her jaw, a souvenir from her past life. "I wish I'd known from the first minute that Catherine Walsh was just the opening act." He kissed her gently as the piano's last note faded. Kora Carter's the real show. Outside, a meadowlark sang in the cottonwoods, its melody carrying across land that was finally undeniably theirs. The setting sun painted the prairie in gold as Boone rested his hands on Kora's shoulders, watching their shadows stretch across the land that was finally free and clear. Some stories start with a gun to your head and end with your heart in your hands. This was one of them. Beyond their window, the wilderness whispered promises. Neither could have imagined that grim wedding morning cattle lowing in pastures that would feed generations, the schoolhouse they had helped build, standing proud where coyotes once prowled, and somewhere out there, new adventures waiting like unbroken mustangs. Kora leaned back against her husband, her calloused fingers covering his. No more ledgers, no more running, just the wide-open future theirs for the taking.